Hey everybody. Continuing on with the category of verbal abuse, abusive anger. We left off discussing how the partner would start to feel as if her equilibrium were off, her spirit is becoming battered, she's hurt by the hostility, and it's very emotionally painful. And in some cases that can lead to physical ailments as well, but that's a topic of another video. Some partners have tried to ignore their mate's angry outbursts, thinking, I am strong. He doesn't really mean it. I won't let him get me down. Sooner or later I'll understand him better, or he'll understand that certain things he says bother me, or he'll learn to ask me what I did, said, meant before he gets mad. What happens as a result of this approach? The partner actually ends up using her strength against herself. She struggles to stay balanced and serene while using her strength to endure and to try to understand the abuse. She may suffer from traumatic shocks, and certainly she becomes more confused. As Anne put it, he loves me, he just doesn't like me. I actually said that to my narc back in June. I believe I mentioned that in my video titled My Aha Moment, when I looked at him and said, I don't think you like me. And I really did feel like that at that point. I could not express a thought. First of all, it was rare that I could get a complete thought out of my mouth before he'd interrupt me, put me down, or, wave me away, silence me. Yeah. Also, if the partner calmly endures the abuser's behavior, he will feel thwarted. He expects a reaction. He needs his fix of both the release of tension and a sense of power over his partner. If he hasn't gotten his partner down, if she shows no signs of losing her enthusiasm, he will increase the abuse. This is probably not a conscious decision. He's just angrier, more tense, and more dependent on his fix of power over, also known as narcissistic supply. And this has been discussed by other YouTubers as well. The abuse will continue to escalate. As you get stronger, and you think you're trying to diffuse the situation by staying calm, and it'll escalate, because that happened with us. I got to a point where I gave up trying to argue with him because he would just shout over me. And I couldn't shout louder than him, and my throat would start to hurt. I'm a smoker. So my throat would start hurting, and I would just stop, and I would just stand there and glare at him. And actually, I was doing Gray Rock, and I didn't even realize what I was doing. But I would just stand there and glare at him and not react. And once he got hip to that technique, he started, getting more pissed off. The tirades would go on longer, and they got louder and became more frequent because he wasn't getting his supply. I wasn't giving him the supply when I would just stand there and glare at him. And he'd make a big ass out of himself, and then he'd end up having to apologize to me the next day because I wouldn't speak to him or have anything to do with him until he'd apologize to me when he would rage at me like that. Okay, this is one of the reasons that verbal abuse increases over time. As the partner adapts, tries to ignore the behavior, possibly hoping it will stop, or hoping she won't inadvertently provoke him, or that she'll figure out what she's doing wrong, or why she's feeling wrong, the abuser increases the intensity and or the frequency of the abuse. Another reason that verbal abuse increases over time is that the fix never really fixes anything. The abuser's lack of a sense of personal power and consequent need for power over persist. Through time, these pressures increase, and as a result, the abuser's anger and hostility increase. As the partner uses her strength to ignore the outbursts, or to make sense of the relationship, or to hope that it will get better, the abuser uses his strength to increase the abuse. If the partner tells her mate how upsetting his outbursts are to her, she will usually face an intense, angry denial, telling her that she's overreacting. One of the reasons anger addicts don't apologize is that to sincerely do so would entail giving up the fix. The fix, the explosion and release of tension, allows the anger addict to maintain his equilibrium. It also gives him a high and a sense of power over. It's the same exact thing as with a drug addict. When they're in denial and they know that if they admit they have a problem, they have to stop doing it. And if they're at a point where they don't want to stop doing it, even though, and consciously in the back of their mind, they know they're killing themselves, they know they're hurting themselves, they know they're hurting their family, they know they're doing something wrong, they will not verbally express that because they don't want to give up their drugs. I have a recording of my narc, and literally when I confronted him over the drugs, and maybe one day I'll play it on the channel, it has to be really heavily edited though, to edit out names and personal information. But he went in like within 1 minute from I'm willing to do whatever it takes to keep our family, because at that point he sensed that the end was coming. He knew I was pretty much getting to the end of my rope with him and his baby temper tantrums. And he says, you know, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to keep our family intact. And then a few seconds later, he said, you know, and he even said, like, out loud, like, yeah, I've been spending too much money. Yeah, I've been partying too much. And he even said, like, crazy stuff that he really didn't even have to. And you know how sometimes they'll just blurt out random stuff, you know, and they'll blurt out a little too much. And he actually said, like, yeah, I've been spending too much money. Yeah, I buy, you know, a couple of pills here, and all kind of other stuff that you didn't even know about. And that's what he started to say. He started to say, like, all the other drugs he was doing, and he like hurried up and cut himself off abruptly, and was like, oh, well, that doesn't matter. That's not important. And then he says, you know, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to keep our family together. And then in the next breath he says, but here are my stipulations. And you'll notice that the narc does this. And this is called managing down of expectations. And it's a manipulation tactic. So you think they're going to give something up that you want. You know, you set a boundary, and then you think at first that they're going to honor it, and then they'll reword it in such a way to where by the end of the statement they're not really even giving anything up. Like he said first, he was willing to do whatever it takes. So I'm sitting there telling him, I had told him previous to this statement of his that it all needs to stop. The pill buying, the weed smoking, everything. I had already quit smoking weed at that point. That's all I was doing. Except for the occasional glass of red wine, which I still enjoy. But at that point, I had already quit smoking weed. And so I was telling him, I think I was telling him he needed to do the same, especially the pills, because he was draining our bank account. And he says, yeah, I was partying too much, I was spending too much money. And then he says, but here are my stipulations. Okay, I'm not making this up. I could not make this up if I tried, because my brain doesn't work like this. After he says he's willing to do whatever it takes, in the next sentence he says, here are my stipulations. I'm not going to stop doing them in totality. I'm still going to party here and there. I'm just not going to, I won't have the parties here. But if one of my friends calls me up and wants to smoke weed, I'm not going to tell him, no. Now, this was also like after we had discussed it cannot be happening anymore because our son had become aware. He knew the smell of the weed. He knew it was going on. And I was like, that's it. Game over. Cut it out. And after he had first said, yeah, I won't have the parties here. Then he says, but if one of my friends calls me up and wants to smoke weed, I'm not going to tell him no because my kids are around. I'm going to smoke weed. So by the end of that paragraph, he went from doing whatever it takes, which according to my standards was no drugs in the house ever, done, time to grow up, be an adult, it's over, the party's over. And by the end of his one paragraph, he went from quitting everything to not giving up anything, nothing changing. And I have that conversation recorded, so I actually have the recording to prove it. That's narc logic. I'm really off on a tangent now. Okay, continuing on. Okay, so for as long as he can deny his responsibility for his anger and can accuse his partner of causing it, the abuser can continue to maintain his equilibrium and to get a high at his partner's expense. The partners of anger addicts and verbal abusers in general are consistently shocked to realize that their mates feel good when they feel hurt. Cora's experience demonstrates this. I told Kurt I had felt bad all day about the argument we'd had that morning. He had just blasted me for no reason. I had tried to reason with him, and he just walked out and gone to work. He said, "What argument? I don't know what you're talking about." I reminded him of how angry he'd seemed that morning when he was yelling at me about how I fixed the eggs. I asked him, "Didn't you feel bad about this morning?" He said, "Are you crazy? I feel fine." "Are you trying to start something?" I said, "No." In general, the anger addict's attitude is, how can I be doing anything wrong when I feel so right? Let Bella show us how it works. Bert agreed to go to a marriage counselor with me. At the counselor's, he heard me say I felt hurt and fear when he yelled at me. After he left, he yelled at me again, saying I'd attacked and blindsided him. I was confused. I didn't know what he meant or how he thought I had been attacking him. The accusatory nature of the abuser's angry outbursts usually leaves the partner wondering what she said wrong. It is not uncommon for the partner of an anger addict to mull over events, struggling to discover what she does or says that angers her mate. If he directs all his anger at her and blames her for it as well, if mutual friends tell her how lucky she is to have such a wonderful mate, if the abuse doesn't take place in public, if the abuser tells her he loves her, if her family of origin did not provide a good model of a loving relationship, she may have no idea that she is actually suffering from abuse. She will keep looking for rational reasons for her mate's behavior. I think we've all experienced this. How many years were you asleep? I was asleep for 2 decades. Before I finally started getting a clue, like, not all married couples fight like this. This isn't normal. That there's something wrong with this guy. Abusive anger diminishes the partner's desire for sexual intimacy. How many nights did I get yelled at and belittled and ridiculed that there's something wrong with me because I was hardly ever initiating sex with the narc, with King Infant. You know, after I left King Infant, I finally, when he would finally, because he was trying to hoover me. So he was on good behavior. So he was actually letting me finish my sentences. And when I had the chance, I said to him, you know what? I said, all this fighting over me not initiating sex, I said, why the fuck do you think I wasn't? Would you be sexually attracted to someone who insults you and screams at you all the time? Go figure. Gee. When this occurs, the abuser then accuses her of being uncaring and unfeeling, and she may think that something is wrong with her. Although the hostility stemming from the abuser's free-floating anger has nothing to do with the partner, it does affect her deeply. She will feel emotional pain even if she does not recognize that her mate is hostile towards her, and even if she thinks that she is to blame in some as yet to be discovered way for his anger. Abusive anger may begin with irritable snaps and then evolve into rages. This increasing intensity and frequency usually develops very, very gradually over years, but it may develop very rapidly within the first year or months of the relationship. Depends on the narc. 2 of the women I interviewed described a dramatic change in their mate's behavior which occurred right after marriage. Although abusive anger is accusatory and blaming, the partner of the abuser does not provoke, nor does she consciously or unconsciously plan to provoke or get the abuser. On the contrary, as I listened to the partners and former partners of verbal abusers, I realized that they had made every effort to express themselves clearly and respectfully. Usually they felt that they had failed. There are no particular phrases that identify abusive anger. To get a sense of what abusive anger sounds like, you might go back to the previous chapter and say all the abusive phrases listed there as angrily as you can. Or you might read them with your jaw clenched, spitting the words through your teeth. The greater impact they have when read angrily best demonstrates the impact they have on the partner. Some signs of abusive anger are a lack of warmth from your mate, as well as all verbal abuse. Irritable outbursts, sneers, argumentativeness, temper tantrums, shouting, yelling, raging, explosiveness, and sarcasm that is directed toward you and or others. Any one of these may signal to a woman that she is with an angry man. Sarcasm, according to Robert Brownbridge, he says sarcasm is the tip of the iceberg which conceals a mountain of anger. Just think about that for a minute. Physical signs of abusive anger include all the body language associated with anger, such as clenched teeth and a raised fist. Also, of course, any physical assault and destruction of your property is a demonstration of abusive anger. Ollie Matthews did a good video on this about how they may not hit you or touch you, but if they start like throwing things, breaking things, especially if they break specifically things that belong to you, that's covert physical abuse. And it's an intimidation. It's a physical intimidation tactic. Punching holes in walls. Banging the bathroom door into the shower rod until it bends and falls into the tub. I think there was another part in the book too where she talks about this thing they do. A lot of them love sleep deprivation. Mine would start arguments with me like shortly before I was planning on going to bed, and then end up keeping me up arguing until like 2 or 3 in the morning. And then I'd get like 2 hours of sleep and then have to get up and go to work. Another thing they do is like, it's a sleep deprivation thing. They'll wake you up in the middle of the night by pouring water on you. That could be a precursor to physical abuse. So if anything like that is going on in your relationship, you're going to want to start maybe making some plans to leave. Another precursor, and I forget where she mentions it, in which book she mentions it in, but another escalation that could get you closer to physical abuse is when they start abusing you in public. Because a lot of times what it's happening behind closed doors, and like she says, like people you know and people that they work with and acquaintances, they just think they're swell. They think they're wonderful people. And they have no idea that it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like behind closed doors, they're a monster. But when they start letting their monster show in front of friends and family or in public places, in front of random strangers, I've had all 3 of those. Some verbal abusers do not express their anger overtly, but abuse much more covertly. These more covert abusers are angry and hostile. However, they don't express their anger in the pattern of the anger addict. It seems that they may be more inclined to develop long-range plans to control and manipulate their partners. Anger addicts, on the other hand, are usually quick to anger and are easily irritated. Most partners don't realize that an easily irritated person is an angry person. They believe instead that they are just some things their mate is sensitive to, but they just can't quite understand exactly what they are. In fact, the anger addict will reconstruct whatever he hears in such a way that it becomes for him the reason for venting his anger on his partner. The anger itself is irrational. I can tell you, I can't tell you how many times, especially after I read these books, I could pick it out. He would just be, the way he'd be studying my face if I was talking, or he'd deliberately ask me about something, and when I'd be giving my answer to the question that he asked me, he initiated the transaction. He would, his eyes would be squinting. You could see him just chomping at the bit, just waiting for anything that he could take and misconstrue and twist around to make it sound like I was making a dig at him. Even if I was just completely innocently answering the question that he asked me. I mean, we got in fights at the end about how, because he sensed that I was pulling away, and he was arguing with me about how I was being distant with him. And the thing was, I wasn't being distant. I just wasn't fawning over him. I wasn't thinking about him when I went to the grocery store and picking up the little treats that he likes, or walking up behind him while he was in his man cave and giving him a little back tickle for a couple of minutes. I would do stuff like that before to kind of maybe stave off the rages. But when I stopped doing that, but when he talked to me, I wasn't rude or sarcastic. I was perfectly pleasant, and I was still saying I love you. I was, keeping up appearances, just trying to keep the peace. And he was trying to argue with me that I was like sounding distant on the phone, and I was just being cordial, and I wasn't, talking to him. Now keep in mind that this is a man that wouldn't ever let me finish a sentence. If I tried to tell him a story or an anecdote or something that happened in my day, he would be giving me the hand motion like, hurry up, move it along, like he did not like listening to me talk. And he rarely talked to me on the phone. Rarely texted me. He has texted me more in the last 8 months than he did in the last 3 years of our marriage. And then he was sitting there wondering why I wasn't talking to him more on the phone, why I wasn't more engaging on the phone. And he made a whole argument out of that. It was ridiculous. And I was you're just quiet. You just sit there. And I was like, well, if you call me, I'm waiting. I'm not going to just start talking. If you call me, I'm waiting to hear what you called me about. What else am I supposed to do? But of course I was stupid for saying that. Because it was a situation where he had called me and he said that I was being quiet, or he called me and I just sat there and didn't say anything, and I was like, well, if you called me, I'm waiting for you to tell me what you're calling about. If somebody calls me, I don't pick up the phone and start yapping. I'm going to say hello, and then I'm going to let them talk. He don't get that, though. He don't know how to converse with people. He only knows how to monologue. Okay, so let's see. Here's another example. May discovered. At first I was concerned that I'd inadvertently anger him. Later, when I realized that there was no real reason for it, I was frightened of his irrationality. That's the point I got to. When I stopped talking, because I didn't know what was going to set him off anymore. So I would avoid him. Because sometimes, like I said, it was like a minefield. You'd think you were stepping on a safe place, but then explosion. There was just no rhyme or reason to it sometimes. Like the chicken parmesan fight. I told you all about that one. Okay. I've gone on long enough. So we're going to cut this one off here. Have a good night. Thanks again for listening.